All right, we are in the book of Judges chapter 17, and the word microcosm applies here. A microcosm or microcosmos just means where there is something of the universal in some particular. So we're going to key in on a story here about really just a few people, Micah, his mom, and this Levite. And we're going to focus on them, but the story isn't just about them. It's a microcosm, meaning this story relates or reflects a much bigger picture. It reflects actually a picture of Israel as a whole during the time of the Judges. And not only is it a microcosm of Israel as a whole during the time of Judges, it also ends up being a parable of the history of humanity in our own story. So we read this, and it's very particular and specific to a very small group of people, and yet it also has something to say to all of our hearts. Now, as I mentioned before, from here on out, we turn a corner in the book of Judges. Samson is the last judge talked about in the book of Judges. In the rest of the chapters, all the way to chapter 21, we will never hear the word judge again, either in verb or noun form. We turn a corner. And the remaining chapters, many theologians see them as like an appendix. This isn't chronologically what happens after the death of Samson. These stories actually take place sometime in the middle of these hundreds of years during the time of the Judges. It's just like an appendix. So the end of the story was Samson. These are now like extra stories, side stories that fill you in on something. Because if you remember, there was a refrain that we saw a lot. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes, or they did evil in the sight of Yahweh. But you don't get like any specifics about what it is. What does it mean that they did what was right in their own eyes? Like in what way did they do what was right in their own eyes? And these stories are intended to tell you, well, this is just one or two stories, but this idea is what everybody was doing. What we see here with Micah and what he's about to do with some idols is a little picture, a little microcosm of what it is, or what it means that the Jews, they did what was right in their own eyes, and they did evil in the sight of Yahweh. And of course, in chapters 1 through 16, it's predominantly about this battle outside. You know, the Israelites are having problems with the Midianites or with the Philistines, right? External struggles with other nations that God is using to punish and judge Israel for her idolatry. Now we're going to focus in on the internal struggles, because really, why did they have trouble with the Philistines? Why did they have trouble with the Midianites? Is because there were conflicts about the borders, or they had troubles with their neighbors? No, the only reason they had trouble was because of their internal life, because of what their attitudes were concerning God. All the trouble that came upon them, it had very little to do with the nations around them. It had a lot to do with their own hearts towards God. And so that's where the rest of the book goes. What does it mean that they did what was right in their own eyes? And so what we see here with Micah, you multiply it by thousands, maybe millions of hearts in Israel. Everyone was doing the kind of thing that Micah was doing. So we are hopefully going to see a little bit of a reflection, not only of the heart conditions of the people in the story, not only the heart condition of the people of Israel during the time of Judges, but human hearts throughout history, including yours and mine right now. So let's read Judges 17, a few verses, then we'll talk in a few verses, and we'll talk as we usually do. Judges 17. There was a man of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Micah. And he said to his mother, the 1,100 pieces of silver that were taken from you, about which you uttered a curse and also spoke it in my ears, behold, the silver is with me, I took it. And his mother said, Blessed be my son by Yahweh. And he restored the 1,100 pieces of silver to his mother. And his mother said, I dedicate the silver to Yahweh from my hand for my son, to make a carved image and a metal image. Now, therefore, I will restore it to you. So when he restored the money to his mother took 200 pieces of silver and gave it to the silversmith, who made it into a carved image and a metal image. And it was in the house of Micah. And the man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and household gods, and ordained one of his sons, who became his priest. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Our attention turns, and the narrative turns towards this hill country of Ephraim. Now, Ephraim is north of Jerusalem, about 12 miles. It's hilly, as you might imagine, and it's sort of in the middle of Israel, closer to the south maybe, but it's right there in the midst of these hills. It's kind of like our hills over here. So imagine hilly country like that. In Ephraim, they lived in those hills. And we are introduced to a man by the name of Micah. His name means, who is like Yahweh? Who is like him? He's incomparable, right? The answer is, who is like Yahweh? No one. But in the case of this Micah, who is like Yahweh? Well, these metal images. This right here is like Yahweh. It's ironic, and it's telling that there's a parable and a story even in the name there. Now, there's a few points I want to make, and we'll see if I can get them to land the right way. But we are looking at some universals of sinfulness, right? Some universals of sinners and sinfulness. There's going to be 4 points here. And the first one is we see that Micah and his mother are sinfully immature / ignorant. Another way to put this is they are superstitious, a superstitious people. Oh, let's go back. It seems like the son, Micah, has stolen 1,100 pieces of silver from his own mother. This would have been a lot then. I calculated this would be about 28 pounds of silver, which nowadays is only $11,000 worth of silver. But back then, it would have been worth much more. You can't really compare. It's a fortune. It's a ton of money. It's not the kind of amount that you would just steal from your mother. And ironically then, what he's done, Micah, is dishonored his mother and stolen from her, because you can't steal from your mother without dishonoring her. That's 2 commandments just on the bare face of it that immediately he's broken. You're thrown into the situation where they're having a conversation about the fact that he's stolen this money. So this tells you about Micah. He's a thief and a mother dishonorer. Now, the question is he ignorant of the law? Does he just not know that you're not supposed to steal from your mother? Well, obviously, they are children of Israel, and they know the 10 Commandments. Not only that, you just know. I don't know many cultures that would think it's okay to steal from your mother. I don't know. Maybe you come from a culture where it's okay to do that. You tell me, but I just can't think of any where they would think it's a virtue to steal from your mother. He knows not to steal from his mother, yet he does it. And what's ironic here is that he returns the money, but it's not because maybe he suddenly forgot that, oh yeah, you shouldn't steal from your mother, and someone told him, you shouldn't steal from your mother. Oh yeah, I didn't know that. No. Why does he return the money? It's because his mother uttered a curse against him. Now, uttering a curse is not like curses, like swear words, but a curse meaning may God bring judgment. Now, in the Bible, God does a lot of this kind of cursing. He does curse people or pronounce curses, and really they're just pronouncements of the judgment on sin. That if you sin, this is going to happen. That's like a curse. If you break the law, this thing will happen to you. That's like a cursing. Now, people do curse other people in the Bible, but they really only have the power to do that if they are like a prophet. Because if they're a prophet, they're speaking on the behalf of God. If you keep going this way, cursed are you. It wasn't like a normal practice for people just in everyday life to put a curse on someone, like I put a curse on you. And this is certainly not the kind of cursing of like witchcraft and paganism where you utter some kind of curse against someone. Now, that's not normal to the Bible, but maybe because they are practicing paganism, it was a curse like that. We don't know for sure, but the Bible does say in Deuteronomy 27:16, cursed are you if you dishonor your mother or your father. Deuteronomy 28:18 through 21 says there's a death penalty for being a rebellious child. It's a curse, let's say. If you disobey your parents and you're stubborn and rebellious, the curse is you should be stoned, taken out to outside the village and stoned. Is it likely that the mother brought those passages up? You know, son, Deuteronomy 27:16 says, "Cursed are you if you dishonor your father and your mother, and if you keep doing this, I can invoke the death penalty on you." It just seems more likely, and it's a little bit of reading between the lines, that she was making some kind of threat, or maybe even using like a pagan curse, like appealing to some other god, because obviously she's got a mixed heart here, we'll talk about in a second. Now, the way that Micah acts and responds throughout this whole story, I don't know if you pick up on it, but you just get the feeling that this guy is so immature in his thinking. He's not fully grown. Just spiritually speaking, and even generally speaking, you read this and you think, what is wrong with you? Are you dumb? Like, how could you even, you have children, how could you even think of stealing from your own mother? There's something about him that just seems rash, immature, ignorant, maybe given to superstition, perhaps later on when we get to the story of the Levite, he asked this young man, a Levite, to be like a father to him, even though the man's probably as old or younger than he is. It's just immature. He's ignorant. He's stunted in his growth, emotionally and probably spiritually. Similarly, you have this mother, and this is the way Spurgeon puts it. Very little was her blessing worth. The blessed is my son. Very little was her blessing worth, since she has been so ready at cursing. Her silver was her God, while it was in the form of shekels, quite as much as when it was fashioned into an image, or else she had not cursed because of the loss of it. Her son Micah, who became so ostentatiously religious, was a thief to begin with. A superstitious dread made him restore what his conscience did not forbid him to steal. Clearly in her actions here, and the kind of man boy that she raised, she was just as ignorant and mature and superstitious as her son was. You even get the impression maybe her son was her idol. And you've probably met women like that who treat their grown children as their little babies, and yet an object of criticism and also an object of like infantilizing, treating them like a baby. I don't know if you've met people like that, but I have, where it's like, you're treating them like a big man child, especially if it's a woman and her son. And the word superstition, I think, fills in the gap here. If you are spiritually ignorant, spiritually immature, what you tend to gravitate towards is superstitious kinds of beliefs and behaviors. There's a correlation between lacking spiritual sense and falling into sin and having very immature thinking. I've spoken with so many people who should know better. I knew, a man who's cheating on his wife, and when he was called out on it, his response was so immature on why he was doing it. It's almost like all of a sudden this grown man, well into his 60s, he's making excuses like a teenager caught sneaking his dad's liquor. It's just so immediately childish. Sin can make someone so immediately childish in their attitudes, and what it betrays is an immaturity in their own heart. It's just so funny to talk to someone. Like, I don't always say this out loud. Sometimes I do. But there's many times where I think in my head when I'm counseling or just, doing something in like a group, and I think, if I'm the most mature person in this room right now, we're all in trouble. If I have to be the one that's like the most responsible and mature, we're in trouble. Because I'm not necessarily so, wise and so scripturally knowledgeable that I'm the peak of the summit here. I often hope to surround myself with people who are much more spiritually mature than I am. And I love when I'm in that situation, because I'd rather not be the guy that has to bear the responsibility for things, to be honest with you. But here you see the consequences of a spiritually immature, ignorant people. They're bound to superstitious thoughts. They're invoking the name of God in context where it just doesn't even make any sense. Your son just stole from you, and when he returned it, you're praising God and, in a way, praising your son. It doesn't make any sense. He's not even really repentant. He was just threatened. Sin makes you dumb and immature. And when you have a whole culture that seems so blatant and indulging of the celebration of sin, you have a society that just seems, on the whole, very immature and naive. I can't help but think that way. You know, everyone says that probably about their generation, or every generation probably says that about the previous generation. Like, are they dumber? Are they more immature? Are they more ignorant? What's going on here? And the answer is probably yes. We are, and they are. But I do think as you look around, it used to be, I don't want to get too much on a tangent here, but it used to be that folks would get married, have kids, in their 20s. Now, that's not happening until like late 30s. There's just a real delay in growing up and being mature. And I think it's coinciding with less religion, less faith in our society and culture, that there's a maturity that comes with knowing God, understanding his word, understanding how the world works in God's system. And when you neglect that, you just see the immaturity comes with it. And so here, sinfulness is resulting in immaturity, ignorance, superstition. And of course, we also see in the mother and the son here that they are sinfully religious. They're sinfully religious. Or what we will see is they're syncretistic. That's a fancy word. Syncretistic means they're trying to combine religions together to make something that's easier to follow. So syncretism is the practice of combining religions together to make it something more like you want to follow. So not only are they immature and superstitious, they're also syncretistic. Notice what the mother said there. Blessed be my son by Yahweh. She is trying to invoke the blessing of God on her son, who just stole from her a ton of money and only gave it back when he was threatened. And she thought that her son deserved glory for this, blessing from the Lord. To think that this was the work of Yahweh when it was her own superstitious curse that compelled her son to repent, it's hard to attribute that to anything, again, except extreme ignorance or stupidity. But in order to celebrate this, she takes some of the money and wants to, in a way, give it back to her son. It makes sense if some stranger found your wallet and you had a ton of cash in it and you wanted to reward him for bringing it back, and you give him some amount of cash. You've probably heard stories like that. But what wouldn't make sense if someone mugged you, right? If someone mugged you and then you had like a gun or a knife, he said, hold on, you're not mugging me. Give me my money back. And they give it back to you and say, thanks for giving it back. Here's a couple $100 for giving it back. It doesn't make any sense. And it's because she has this backward view about religion. And she's trying to combine it in a way, like that may not make sense to us, but the pagan gods were kind of that way, this manipulative, abusive, they were manipulative and abusive. The pagan gods of this time, again, you would sacrifice your children to them in order to secure prosperity and blessing for yourself, whereas the Bible says the children are the prosperity and the blessing. You see, it's backward, it's abusive. So she immediately dedicates some of her money to disobey the second commandment, which is, of course, you shall not make any image for yourself. You shall not try to imagine God as anything that is in the creation. You cannot depict the invisible, immortal God as anything that he has made in order to worship him. And beyond even rewarding her son's behavior, she gives him this idol. She's dedicated an idol to Yahweh that was born from the idolatry of her son and her idolatry of her silver. This idol is born from her own idolatry. and she gives it to her son. And so you have this weird mix, right, of Yahweh worship, true worship of God, and this paganism of making an image and rewarding this really terrible behavior that God hates. And again, that's syncretism. And there's a real danger to syncretism, combining and merging religious practices. And in the case here and in Christianity, the true worship of God with other pagan practices, which can be either formally doing that or informally. For example, there's a lot of syncretism in the Catholic Church, especially in the Latin world. When the Spanish conquistadors sacked the Aztecs in like the 1600s, they brought Catholicism with them. And the indigenous people were pagans. You know, they worshiped idols and gods and goddesses and things like that. And they were, let's say, compelled to convert. And some of them were resistant to that. And you have a couple ways then of compelling people to convert that are a little stubborn. You can either threaten them with a sword, which is what happened too, or you can say, you know, you have this goddess, this Aztec goddess there in Guadalupe, and it just so happens that we kind of worship this Virgin Mary. And so the story is that someone had a vision of the Virgin Mary there at this, happened to be the place where they worshiped this Aztec goddess, and they kind of conveniently merged it together and called her Our Lady of Guadalupe. And they also had a practice, these Aztec indigenous people, of celebrating a day called Dia de los Muertos. And, you know, we kind of celebrate, you know, dead saints on November 1st and 2nd. October 31st is All Hallows Eve, right? Halloween. All Saints Day and All Souls Day is November 1st. So All Hallows Eve, All Hallows Day is November 1st. Okay, did you know that? That's why October 31st is All Saints Day, the day before, Eve. Hallows Eve. All Saints Day is November 1st. All Souls Day is November 2nd. And, you know, it's kind of a way that we honor our dead. So I know you got this Aztec practice of honoring the dead. Well, wouldn't it be kind of convenient if we sort of just merge them together a little bit, even though they are very different worldviews? Like Dia de los Muertos is nothing to do with the Bible or any Christian practice. Now, to be fair to the Catholic Church, that syncretism is not official dogma. They're not for that officially on paper. But it's allowed to happen. And they know for sure that it's happening in the Catholic Church. Even in the cases like Dia de los Muertos, where the beliefs are contradictory, they let that syncretism happen. So that's informal, but sort of like an open secret, that they allow that sort of thing. Now, that's a very obvious kind of syncretism, where you're taking the practice, the pagan practices of people you're trying to convert, and rather than really teaching them about the gospel, about Jesus and the forgiveness of sins, about there's no other gods to worship, that all these pagan gods are no gods at all, you just sort of mix and match and take some things that sound like Christianity and just put a Christian label on it. You might say, well, that's kind of obvious, we shouldn't do that. But, you know, there are little things that start to stick in our religion that almost seem like God's commands, and before you know it, you've combined something with Christianity that isn't necessarily biblical. And I'll give you a silly one and then a serious one. So if I sneeze right now, almost, you know, at least some of you are going to say, bless you, right? God bless you. Now, is there any place in the Bible that says, when you sneeze, you got to say, God bless you? No, there isn't. Now, there's different explanations for how that came up in the culture. Some say, like people are afraid like your soul's going to come out your nose or something like that, and just weird, bizarre stuff. But you can imagine that if you were new to Christianity, and every time you go to church, every time someone sneezes, someone says, God bless you, is that a thing that we're supposed to do, right? And it could be something. Maybe you even think it is, right? And it seems very close. Now, it's not a big deal per se, but it's slightly pagan. So, I mean, you don't have to do this. But what I do when people sneeze, I say Gesundheit, right? That's a classic one. It's like, and it just means something like good health to you or something. Nothing to do with God's blessing. So I say that because I'm like, I don't know if I want to encourage to say, God bless you. Why do you say it, right? What does it have to do with needing God's blessing at all? I'm so much more holy because I'm trying to avoid syncretism. That's not why. I just, yes, Uriah.
Bless is another way to say something.
Bless is another way to say something?
Yeah.
Like what? What do you mean by that?
You sneeze when you say that.
Yeah, when I sneeze and you say bless you, is that what you're talking about?
There's a different way.
There's a different way to say it?
Yeah.
When someone sneezes?
It means something else to God.
It means something else to God? We'll talk about that more.
Bless is something like praise.
Bless is something like praise. Yeah, sometimes bless can mean praise, right? So what's weird is we're saying bless you. It's like God bless you. You sneeze, so God bless you. Like why? I'll give you a more serious example. So a more serious example is something that I heard of from an Armenian friend of mine. It's the evil eye. And maybe you've heard of it. If you know people that are from Turkey, Mediterranean, kind of the Near Eastern area, Greek even, you've heard of this evil eye, which it's basically like a pagan idea. Now, the Bible does talk about having an evil eye, but it's not like a mystical thing. It's like having an eye that's full of jealousy, meaning you see something and there's temptation or sin involved. Evil eye is more like cursing, and it's what's called animistic or pagan, because in order to ward off the evil eye, you need a charm or a talisman. Right? So you need like a blessed or holy object in order to ward off the evil eye. Well, that's pagan. There's nothing about that in the Bible, but there are some Christians who that was in their culture, and they became Christian, or it sort of became very integrated, especially if like Orthodox Church. We can talk more about that later, but the point is it happens. You got silly examples and more serious ones, but it happens even in faith. You just start to think about it, and we see that in both Micah and his mother, superstitiousness, of course, has replaced true worship, and syncretism has happened when, even though they know Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, they have those 5 books of the Bible that are very clear on how to worship God, and yet they still screwed it up. You have literally a text that says, don't do that, and they still do it. And the way they sell it to themselves. There's blatant disobedience to God's laws, and then there's syncretism, which makes you feel like you're worshiping God in your own way because you're not blatantly disobeying, you've just mixed it with something else. But the problem is it doesn't matter how much you mix it together, but if you put arsenic in milk, I'm not drinking it. I'm not going to drink arsenic with milk, even if it's just a little bit. I'll just put a little bit in there. Well, maybe a little tiny bit is not going to kill me, but why would I even risk that? Why would I even risk poison in something that is supposed to be good or healthy for me? And so we see syncretism is like that. And we need to know then what is cultural and what is biblical. Some would think certain practices of American Christianity are true Christianity. And there's many instances where people go to Africa or South America or India and other countries, and they plant churches that are more American than they are Christian, because many missionaries and some churches have merged like Americans, culture with Christendom. And it's not necessarily sinful to do things that are more reflective of your culture. Like we just had lunch and it was sandwich meats and mayo and mustard, and you probably don't bat an eye at that. But other cultures say, that is so weird and so bizarre. Well, I'd expect them to have lunch, whatever they're going to have lunch, and I wouldn't say it's holy to have mustard or not. Well, that sort of thing's okay, but you need to make sure you're clear on what's biblical and necessary and what is just, this is how we do things. So we always try to strive for here at ICC, kind of making it clear what is biblical and necessary to do and what is just our style. So I tell you, we do communion once a month. That's our tradition. That's what I say every time. So you know, this is what we do. Some other churches do differently. They're not sinning because they do it. So I try to make clear what is tradition, what is cultural, what is necessary, what is biblical. It's necessary that we do communion. How frequently? It doesn't say. We see that next, that Micah goes all in on being sinfully autonomous. So you have sinfully immature and ignorant, which leads to superstition. You have them being sinfully religious and combining, being syncretistic, combining pagan religion with God's religion. And they're simply autonomous. They seek a self-made religion. Micah goes all in on creating his own religion. The phrase there's household gods, excuse me, in verse 5, these are just, sometimes you can make them to worship Yahweh like these images were, but sometimes they're just images or figures to represent other gods, Baal and Ashtaroth and all these things. It's just idolatry of a different sort. Again, you shall have no other gods before me. Commandment 1, Commandment 2, you shall not make for yourself any images to depict this God. He makes an ephod. An ephod was a special garment, sort of like a shirt in a way that has fancy designs and things on it. In Exodus 28, verse 2, it says that it was for glory and for beauty, for the high priest to wear. So it is something that was to set apart a priest for the service that he was doing. And so there's only supposed to be the priest who wears these things, but on his own initiative, Micah just says, my son, you're a priest now. Go and do some priestly things. Just on his own accord, and to make it official, makes an ephod for him. Now, we won't get into the whole history of the priesthood, but priests could only come from the tribe of Levi. Now, not all Levites were priests. So it's not like everyone from the tribe of Levi had to be a priest. A priest could only come from this tribe. There was other ways to serve in Israel for these Levites, even if they weren't priests. And they had a specific kind of role. Out of all the tribes, they had a unique role. They get their own book of the Bible, right? The book of Leviticus. It's just for them, just for their role. Everybody else, we talked about this in Judges, when they came into the Promised Land, they sectioned out different pieces. And each of the tribes got, a territory of the land. But the Levites got none. They got 48 cities all throughout the territories in each of their brothers' tribes. And they were to serve there in these cities to serve their brothers, to act as priests and servants. And they were supposed to get their money and their provisions for life from the other tribes contributing to them. So they didn't have land, so they couldn't farm, they couldn't raise crops, they couldn't sell. Their brothers, the other tribes, were supposed to provide for their needs because they had the special role to serve God by being a mediator between them and God. Right? So very unique, special role, and Micah just gives it. He either doesn't care or doesn't know. He's either, again, ignorant or just immature about this, just makes his son a priest out of nowhere. There was only one place to worship as well. You're supposed to worship at the tabernacle. That's the place that had the ark in it, and the high priest would go in once a year to offer a sacrifice for the behalf of all of Israel. Only the sacrifices had to be done there, and it was a pagan thing to just go anywhere and worship. That was a pagan thing that you could go anywhere, go to a hill, go to your house, and just worship your God privately the way you want to. Sinful autonomy, sinful just, I'm going to make my religion so convenient, just tailored for me. So Micah here starts his own religion. Now it sounds absurd, but let's be honest, we all do this. When you're a kid, it's silly. I remember when I was a kid, and my next door neighbor was not a Christian at all. And how do kids come up with their theology? Well, you hear random Bible stories like Jesus walked on water, and you say with your next door neighbor, I bet you if we have enough faith, we can walk on the water of this pool. So we would try to believe enough that we could walk on this water, and we would sometimes, maybe a running start would help. You get a running right in, right? How do you get your theology as a kid? You're syncretistic, you're superstitious. You watch Raiders of the Lost Ark, and you think, this was based on a true story. You think the ark could melt people's faces off? And you make, as a kid you do that. You combine these stories and these movies and you make this weird religion in your mind. Everybody does it. As a kid, it's silly, it's immature, it's illogical, it's ill-informed. But Micah is an Israelite in the promised land without any excuse for his ignorance, as well as his mother. But at some point in their sin, between their immaturity, their superstitiousness, between their syncretism and sinful religiosity, their desire for autonomy, doing whatever they wanted, they made their own religion. And Micah creates Micahology, House of Micah, Micah's house of worship. And the fact is, it isn't very hard at all to start your own religion or your own cult. It just takes a little ignorance, a little religiosity, sinful religiosity, and a little desire for autonomy, and there you go. Kids do it all the time. Trust me, adults do it all the time too. Now, the implication here is that they wouldn't do this. It says, in those days, there's no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. The implication is that these people wouldn't have done this if there was a king with the power and the authority to enforce the right worship of God. They needed a king to lead them to that, and they needed a king to be an example of that, and they needed a king, actually, as we talked about this morning, that they could actually worship because he would do everything for his people. In that phrase, everyone did what was right in his own eyes, Spurgeon says, what it means is that every man did what evil he liked. That's what it really meant. And so we have this final example of this Levite who sinfully sells out. Sin for sale and selling himself for sin. Now there was a young man of Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah, who was a Levite, and he sojourned there. And the man departed from the town of Bethlehem in Judah to sojourn where he could find a place. And as he journeyed, he came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah. And Micah said to him, where do you come from? And he said to him, I am a Levite of Bethlehem in Judah, and I'm going to sojourn where I may find a place. And Micah said to him, stay with me, and be to me a father and a priest, and I'll give you 10 pieces of silver a year, and a suit of clothes, and your living. And the Levite went in. And the Levite was content to dwell with the man, and the young man became to him like one of his sons. And Micah ordained the Levite, and the young man became his priest, and was in the house of Micah. Then Micah said, now I know that Yahweh will prosper me, because I have a Levite as a priest. He did know what the Levites were for. Anyway, it's hard to say how this Levite was also from the family of Judah, and so you think, oh, maybe his dad was from Judah, his mother was a Levite, all this stuff. It doesn't necessarily change anything. The fact of the matter is, this Levite could live in one of 48 cities, like I said. He was bound to be in one of those because his job is to serve his brothers. So what is this Lone Ranger Levite doing? He's already in the wrong. Just like the story starts with Micah and his mother already in the wrong, you start off with this Levite already in the wrong. What do you mean to find your place? You have one of 48 choices and you're not in one of them, right? Bethlehem is not one of them. So what are you doing out here? You see, he's already wrong. He's already looking to sell out. He's already looking to put sin for sale. He's a fish out of water. But in terms of sin, he's surrounded by it. He's swimming in it. The Levites, this Levite should have been somewhere else, almost anywhere else. He was not in a position just to change jobs. I'm looking for work. I'm looking for a place to be. I'm looking for something to do. No, God told you what you should do and be as a Levite. You have a very specific purpose and plan here. The only thing that would compel you to be out here is your own sinful pursuit and selfishness. And we know he's looking to sell his services as a Levite. Like a prostitute hanging out in those out-of-the-way places. This Levite was far from where he should have been. He is compromised from the get-go, and in an act of providence, or unfortunate providence, I suppose, but the plan of God, he finds Micah in his house, and he immediately takes the opportunity, Micah does, to upgrade his religion. The term father, it's not necessarily a father as in he's looking for a dad, but it's a term of respect and honor, someone who could advise Micah the way a father would. So you must know what you're doing. You're a Levite, so tell me what to do. And of course, ironically, this young man might even be younger than Micah since he became like a son to Micah, and yet this is simply the blind leading the blind. Both of these men are sinfully blind to their own sin and to each other's sin. If he was a true Levite, what would he have done? What are all these idols in here? What's with all these images? What are you doing? If Micah was any sort of holy man, he would have told the Levite, why are you so far from where you're supposed to be? You should be in one of these 48 cities. What do you mean you're wandering around looking for your place? I mean, God told you where you should be, but instead, they mutually affirm each other's sin. And he sells out. The Levite sells out. And it's not even a lot of monetary compensation, but it's at least clothes and food. He sold himself out for just the bare minimum. Isn't that sad? If at least you're going to be a priest for sale, be like these televangelists who are getting private jets and all these things. But he sells out for so little. Whether desperate or just looking for a change of pace, this man decides to become Micah's priest and a hired hand. Now, what does Micah's motivation boil down to? Now I know that Yahweh will prosper me. Now that will make me rich, you could say, because I have a Levite as a priest. So he did know what a Levite was supposed to do. He was not ignorant of his own false religion. He knew he's crafting a false religion, but because of the syncretism, he can kind of justify it. But there's nothing good or noble about Micah's new religion. He's not trying to improve upon Yahweh worship, not even as an excuse. Well, it's really inconvenient to go to the tabernacle and offer sacrifices. Wouldn't it be much better if I could worship here from my home? No, it's just about money. It's just about comfort. It's just about prosperity. And that kind of religion always sells well. It still does. You do have pastors that are selling themselves out sinfully. Sin for sale. Might as well call that's what you might as well call your televangelist programming. Sin for sale. Because what they tend to be offering is like the rebuke in Jeremiah 8:11, peace, peace, when there is no peace. If you just give me money, God will bless you. It doesn't matter if you're sleeping with your secretary or beating your kids. If you give me the money, God will bless you. Sin for sale. 2 Peter 2 talks about how these false teachers will entice you based on your lusts and temptations, saying, it's okay to do that. How could it possibly be okay to do that? Well, if you do it in the worshiping way, it's like syncretism. If you do this in a worshipful way, you can do all the sin you want. All this screams to us that we need true religion, which means we need Jesus. You see, what is happening here is not just Micah and the Levite. What's happening here is not just Israel in the time of Judah. What's here is what's happening right now out there, that people are sinfully immature and ignorant, they're superstitious, that people are sinfully religious and just combining religions to make it easy for them, that people are sinfully autonomous, make up their own religions, buffet style, pick and choose what the religions they want, ultimately making their own religion, and that really we are selling ourselves out to sin. That's happening right here and right now. All of this is screaming to us that we need true religion. And true religion only comes from God, relating to us by reaching down his hand to cleanse lepers, to make the blind see, to forgive sinners, restore us, and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. The problem here is there's no king in Israel to save them. And the true king, the only true king, is the one who laid down his life for his sheep. He doesn't promise prosperity always, but he does promise ultimate blessing at the end. It's a very simple bumper sticker. I tend not to like bumper stickers, like Jesus bumper stickers. But one I do like is this one. And it's very simple. It says, no Jesus, no peace, N-O. No Jesus, no, N-O, peace. No Jesus, K-N-O-W, no peace, K-N-O-W. Like no Jesus, no peace. No Jesus, no peace. That is the religion that we need, not the religion of Micah. Yeah.
God is and you know what He is.
Yeah, exactly like that.
And if there's no God, there's no peace.
Exactly. You got it. You got it. If you can just remember that from my sermon, if everyone could remember that, we'd all be blessed, right? If you are looking for religion just for how it blesses you here in this life, you will do all of this stuff. But if you really, really care for your soul, and you know that it cannot be redeemed by the things or satisfied by the things around us, you will find true religion and true worship of God. You will not be satisfied with all of the distractions and trinkets and things of this life. No Jesus and no peace. And so let us not be like Micah here, who is all of us, who is humanity, but instead, let us seek the one to whom these stories all point to, from Genesis through Deuteronomy, from the Judges and Joshua to all the history and the prophets. Who are they all pointing to? They're pointing to the ultimate, Jesus Christ. If you're not a Christian, I'd love to talk with you more about these things. Where are you with these 4 different points? If you are a Christian, it's good reminders to watch out for those things that can build up in our hearts, traditions that are not from the Bible. And remember how good it is that we have a relationship with Jesus Christ.